Alrighty. So, just first off, go ahead and state your name, year, major, and then your position at ASM.
Sure. My name is Nick Checker. I'm a junior majoring in political science and history. I'm the Chief Justice of the Student Judiciary here at the ASM.
And what is your role as Chief Justice of Student Judiciary?
So, as Chief Justice, I act as the spokesperson, principal, opinion writer of sorts for the Student Judiciary. The Student Judiciary acts as an appellate body for funding decisions made by SFC, SecGB, and the Finance Committee. We also deal with election issues. Our subordinate committee, the Student Elections Commission, actually handles the actual running of the election, but we supervise them as well.
I'm making sure my phone was on vibrate.
Sure.
And what is the primary purpose of Student Judiciary?
Sure. So the Student Judiciary basically acts as a recourse for students that are unsatisfied with the result of a decision made by Finance Committee, SecGB, SFC. So if any group feels that they weren't given due process rights, that the criteria was interpreted in such a way that they were negatively affected, basically we just act as an appellate body to make sure the processes of all these different committees were followed correctly.
And how is Student Judiciary run? How does it work? That kind of thing.
Sure. So Student Judiciary is composed of 7 justices. There's a Chief Justice, myself, and a Vice Chief Justice, and then 5 Associate Justices. We have more camaraderie, I would say, than the other branches of ASM. We're all good friends, so I mean, we're a good rapport with each other. We work basically by consensus. We operate under loose Roberts rules. Not very divisive at all. So I think we're the best functioning body of ASM. I think your paper rated us with an A last year, so I'd like to keep that trend.
Yeah. And how many times do you meet?
We meet weekly, 7 o'clock on Tuesdays for our regular business meetings, and then hearings are scheduled, I fucked that up. Strike, yes.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And what generally happens in one of your meetings?
So in a general business meeting, we just talk about actions and pending cases, so we get a report from whoever's presiding over that case, whether it be myself or the Vice Chief Justice, about when the hearings are being scheduled, if they've signed an opinion yet, what the outcome is likely to be, and we sort of bounce off ideas and maybe addressing certain issues that the panel's having difficulty, figuring out what to do. We also then just hear reports from the officers, so of most interest usually is the Student Elections Commission, so they can just report us the goings on of that committee just to keep us abreast of election issues, especially now with freshman elections coming up.
Can you give us examples of how Student Judiciary has affected students in recent years?
Sure. So I think Student Judiciary has a very important role in just being enacting to balance basically the fiscal responsibility element, being conscientious stewards of segregated fees, and then also making sure that services are available to students through GSSF, grants to groups, to Finance Committee, dispersions of funds for event and travel. So basically making sure that the criteria is, while rigorous, is also very accessible to students, and they basically have a mechanism to appeal a result if they're not satisfied with it. So, I mean, we're not often in the papers, but so we try to operate, I guess, okay, I don't know what I'm saying. Sorry, this camera's making me very nervous.
No. Look at my beautiful face.
Oh, great. So,
I will relax you.
Right. So, what was I saying?
You're talking about being in the papers.
Oh, yes. So, yes, not the most renowned body of ASM. We definitely have an instrumental role in preserving the integrity of our funding processes to make sure all groups are given, due process rights and everything else. So.
And what is the Chancellor's relationship with Student Judiciary?
Sure. So that role was really only defined last year because of a certain group was very unsatisfied with the result of a appeal on their denial of eligibility. So the Chancellor ultimately has the discretion to decide whether or not the criteria was followed correctly. So in the case last year, the Chancellor actually remanded the decision to the Student Council, finding that while a VPN issue did not exist, that our bylaws were basically flawed, and just decided the Student Council needed to make the determination of whether or not the group received eligibility for funding. So I thought that decision was actually inappropriate, and the Student Judiciary actually issued a injunction on the student council from having that meeting, but the partisan composition of student council didn't allow that to actually be enforced. So.
And what is your relationship with student council?
So, yeah, in preserving separation of powers, the student judiciary doesn't really involve itself at all with student council. I'm the only person who actually attends student council meetings just as the officer of my branch, just to report to the other members of the ASM what exactly we've been doing. I do get a stipend, so I think they appreciate knowing what it is that we're doing. But for the most part, most justices don't know student council members. They're not in, in the political fray, so to speak. So, yeah, more of a reclusive body.
In your personal experience and opinion, how has ASM most affected students?
I think ASM affects students in three fundamental ways. The first being shared governance issues. The shared gov committee chair appoints, I think it's 190 some seats to various committees in the university working on a multitude of issues, whether it be just library issues, faculty, hiring, all sorts of things. So that's, I think, where student input is the most felt. Also the campaigns as well, the grassroots organizing the campaigns, whether it be to keep the library open. This year working on a public safety campaign is one of them that I'm most familiar with. So that's the second avenue that they're helping students. And the third is just service delivery, so the funding streams. The Student Services Financial Committee awarding budgets to groups, Finance Committee awarding budgets, or rather grants for travel and events expenses for groups. So really allowing students to, in the fullness of student life on this campus, just through these three ways.
And how has student judiciary, I'm getting over a cold, how does student judiciary at most affect students, do you think?
I think just preserving the integrity of the funding processes. Really, we don't have any dealing with, we don't deal with the campaign element or the shared governance issue. That's a separate branch really of ASM. So fundamentally, we deal just with the funding issues. And I mean, GSSF groups and RSS on campus, I mean, most students are involved in, I would assume, one or two groups. So, I mean, I think extracurricular involvement is incredibly important for students. And the ability that they have to access funds from their student government is incredibly important for allowing them to put on these events and just have something else to look forward to other than an exam or maybe a party. So just getting involved, and that's what we try to do, just preserve these processes so they have access to those funds. It's a very unique opportunity that we have here at Madison, that we have this custodianship of segregated fee money. So, and the allocation of it really, I mean, we're very unique in that sense, and we're able to provide these services to students. So I think that's the most important thing that we do.
What would you change about ASM if it were solely up to you?
Dictatorship. No. Judicial tyranny. No.
Andrew did say he wants a more presidential system instead of a parliamentary system.
Right. Right now, I'll speak to that, sure. So I don't think institutional changes really predispose political outcomes. So I will say that I think it would be useful to have a president, a directly elected president on ASM. So the new Constitution put forth a proposal to create an executive branch that's distinct from both the appropriations and then judiciary and the legislative. And I think that would be really useful in just galvanizing support for these campaigns that are running on a campus-wide platform, so raising the profile of certain issues, and then they can be held accountable to those issues because they're running on, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Whereas now, it's student council is a bit amorphous. You have this chair who's indirectly elected, that people don't really know what that means, the chair, sort of a prime minister of sorts. And then you just don't have this attention drawn to these campaigns because they're internally selected through, I think it's the meeting right before summer recess. So really, it just doesn't really lend that much of a profile to these campaigns. I think that would be great for students to actually identify a person to personify these certain issues that they're raising on campus. So I think, yeah, I agree. A presidential system would probably operate better from that, from raising the profile of that, one of those three issues that ASM addresses. Of course, the shared governance issues I think are being handled well. I mean, we have a good system in place. Obviously, we like to see more shared governance opportunities for students, and our current chair is working diligently in that respect. And then the funding streams, I think for the most part, those are working as best as I can. I mean, certain reforms could certainly be made to make the criteria and things more accessible to students. I think a lot of people criticize our processes as being too bureaucratic, red tape. But I mean, we're talking about millions of dollars of student money, and I think the criteria needs to be rigorous to ensure that we're, again, balancing this fiscal responsibility element with the interest of providing services for students. So, but fundamentally, yeah, I agree with the presidential system would be beneficial to ASM.
Now, your main job as even just a member of Student Judiciary is to interpret the bylaws.
Right.
In that regard, how do you think the bylaws, do you think they hinder or do they help the students more so either way?
Well, the bylaws certainly could be cleaned up, that's for sure. I mean, I believe it's a 70 or 80 page document. There's a lot of inconsistencies in the bylaws, and they've occasionally come up. I mean, I was just perusing through our own bylaws, and I had to submit changes to student council because it was referring to things that don't exist. So, yeah, I think it would, in terms of making ASM more accessible, I think there could be a restructuring the bylaws, certainly.
Now, would that be a massive undertaking?
I think so, and whether or not they're going about it, if this new constitution passes, and there's a committee that's working on that, there's also a rules committee in the current ASM that's charged with sort of eliminating these inconsistencies that exist in the bylaws. And I mean, members of different branches of ASM can, of course, submit bylaw proposals as well to clean up certain areas or elements or improve upon the functioning of their branches. So, I mean, I think people need to be proactive. My predecessor was very proactive in restructuring the way the SJ and election bylaws are written to make them more clear and accessible to students. So, I guess it falls ultimately to the people in power, or in the case that the Constitution passed, the students to call for that sort of change.
Is there anything I didn't touch on regarding Student Judiciary or your position that you'd like to emphasize? Or?
I don't think so. I mean, Student Judiciary is just, again, there to preserve a process. So we're a reactive body. It's an adversarial process. We don't really proactively initiate any sort of complaint or anything, so we just wait for people to have issues. In cases of controversies arise, we're there to deal with it.
And is there anything, anywhere you'd like to steer me with this video regarding ASM? Anything you think should be highlighted?
Sure. I think that fundamentally ASM just, I think there's a lot of apathy amongst the student body about ASM. Like, what is this? Why should I care? I mean, again, when you look at perhaps the campaign issue, again, I think that could be redressed through some institutional changes to raise the profile of the campaigns. But in terms of the funding stream, I mean, a lot of students do benefit from that. Perhaps they're just not that engaged in extracurriculars to know it. But I mean, we allocate millions of dollars to help student groups and to get them involved. So that, I mean, they should be aware of that. That's, I think, at least from my end, that's what I primarily deal with. But I mean, that's the primary function of the student government, is providing access to this funding and allocating funding. So I think they should appreciate that we're doing that for them at least. And then and shared governance as well. While it's not seen, it's not, you know, it's not a very prominent. It's not sexy, so to speak, to talk about shared governance in the newspaper when you're, especially if your paper likes more tabloid stuff. Which, I mean, I don't blame that. I mean, lower order entertainment, but that's fine. So, I mean, those efforts are really proving successful for students and getting students a voice on these committees and shaping the way, especially the Chancellor's Search and Screen. I know the papers cover that. But issues like that, I mean, that's happening every day, whether it be developing curriculum, H&R redesign, all these different proposals that aren't that perhaps interesting and seem maybe dry or mundane, or just not, you know, as interesting as a eligibility denial or something like that. That ASM is, and the people who are involved in ASM want to be helping to advance student power and student involvement in administration and these sorts of things. So, I mean, I think there's a lot. Perhaps it's a messaging issue. Perhaps I know a new press director is working pretty diligently on raising ASM's profile on the campus community through social media and things. So I think that might be the biggest issue with ASM, is that we just aren't able to message correctly for students to appreciate what we really do. So.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure.